I'm pleased today to introduce our speaker. Is Dr. Martin Weidman of the New York Center of Excellence will be presenting today. He is co-director of the New York CoE, and he is the Gellert Family Professor in Food Safety at Cornell University. He has many years of experience working in microbiology and working with whole genome sequencing, and we are very pleased to have him give us an overview of all of the different tools and trainings and different resources that the CoEs can provide with respect to whole genome sequencing. Let me also add that everyone is on mute for right now as you have entered. If you do have questions as we reach the end or as we go along, please unmute your phone or through the WebEx or on your telephone, and then you'll be able to speak. But if you do not have a question, please keep yourself on until that time. All right, Martin, please take it away.
Great, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. If questions come up, feel free to, speak up, just say Martin, stop, or something like that, and insert the questions. We really don't need to wait until the end for questions. What I want to start out with is just sort of a quick reminder of what the Food Safety Centers of Excellence are. This is a group of 6 centers that are funded by the CDC. Here's sort of the official CDC webpage that explains it. And these centers are located in Colorado, Florida, Minnesota, New York, Oregon, and Tennessee. And we really each primarily serve a regional group, but support each other to provide support across the U.S. By design, these centers have the following sort of mission. We are there to provide resources for foodborne illness outbreak investigations by really focusing our efforts on 6 main activity areas: strengthening surveillance and outbreak investigations, analyzing timeliness and effectiveness of responses, training public health staff, educating future food safety workforce, improving capacity of information systems, and evaluating and communicating best practices. And the CoEs include a number of work groups, where there's one work group on whole genome sequencing, which is what I'm representing here today. And obviously what we do really covers multiple of these areas, including strengthening surveillance and outbreak investigation, training, and evaluating and communicating best practices as we move along our learnings with regard to applying whole genome sequencing for outbreak investigations and for surveillance. As a reminder, here are the 6 centers, along with the contact information for each of these centers. So if you want support from the CoEs, either for whole genome sequencing and other areas, these coordinators are your sort of primary entry ports. The states in each region are listed here, but we really function as a continuum. So if you have a contact somewhere else, or if you contact us and we don't have expertise at one center, we will coordinate with the other centers to get you to the right expertise. So if you have whole genome sequencing related questions, requests for support or help or training, you can either contact myself, anyone in the whole genome sequence subgroup, or your regional contacts here, and just ask for help in a specific area, and we do the best we can to support you. This is a list of the members of the CoE work group, so just another idea in terms of who you could utilize as contacts to get support from us, and so you can see who is involved. The CoEs are unique in that each CoE represents a partnership between a state health department and an academic institution. So these members are a mixture of individuals from the public health labs as well as the academic institutions, whether it's Cornell, University of Tennessee, or other schools that are involved in these CoEs. So as we support you in application use of whole genome sequencing, the specific people work with you might be from an academic unit or might be from a state health department. And very often we team up together to support people and provide training. So what does this group do? What are we offering? As a first disclaimer, while it's called training on whole genome sequencing, the training really also more broadly covers next generation sequencing. Often these two terms are used interchangeably, but next-generation sequencing is really a technology platform that allows for rapid whole genome sequencing and high-throughput whole genome sequencing. But next-gen sequencing also allows for other sequencing-based applications, which can become important for other foodborne illness and public health applications. For example, sequencing multiple viral genes in highly parallel fashions is not necessarily whole genome sequencing, but could be used for surveillance of viral illnesses, including viral foodborne illnesses, is used, for example, for HIV, or could be used for HIV surveillance and other surveillance technologies. So some of the trainings we offer and that we will talk about really don't just cover whole genome sequencing, but also some of these other applications of the next-gen sequencing platform. As one of the key features of the CoEs is to make sure we don't duplicate or replicate training efforts and work done by other units, we've really so far focused our efforts on training of epidemiologists. There is considerable good amount of training of labs that is covered by CDC, but also important now by regional PulseNet labs and others. So in the first year, 2 years of our activities in whole genome sequencing, we really haven't focused on the lab part, but focused on the training of epidemiologists. The training does sometimes go beyond foodborne pathogens because, again, these technology platforms will be used broadly, and very often it might be the same people that support use of next-gen sequencing platforms for whole genome sequencing of foodborne pathogens, but also for applications beyond foodborne. So we don't just do foodborne, but particularly since some of our funding came from the AMD group, Advanced Microbial Diagnostic Groups at CDC, we do go outside, which I think is very appropriate because, again, the broad use of these technologies. So what are the specific activities the CoE whole genome sequencing work group has focused on? The initial work we did was on the development of modules and webinars. And modules in these cases are asynchronous 30 to 40 minute recorded PowerPoint slides that were not designed to be in real time as question and answers, but they were designed to provide basic information related to whole genome sequencing, really providing sort of baseline information and reminders on genetics, how to analyze sequence data, etc. These were paired with webinars that were then at a certain time offered with question and answers provided, question answering periods provided, to sort of go more in depth, where the modules were expected to be sort of a pre-view, pre-reading to these webinars. These webinars, however, were recorded and are available for viewing, even though design was more for them to be active and have multiple participants at a given time. In addition, a considerable effort has been focused on live learning sessions, which sometimes might seem like webinars because they use some of the same technology platforms, but the idea here is really to bring together smaller groups, consistent groups over 4 to 5 sessions together to learn together and develop a community that will help with training and other efforts to move to improve the application of whole genome sequencing tools. And we'll introduce those in more detail. We provide Q&A pages, other resources, and then have and will continue to focus on one-on-one support where there is need with regard to implementation, interpretation of whole genome sequencing-based tools for foodborne disease surveillance or outbreak investigations. And I'm going to go into more details in all 4 of these just to give you a flavor of what we're doing and how we can potentially support you or some of your colleagues or others that might not be on this webinar today. This is the New York Integrated Food Safety Center of Excellence webpage. I'm showing this because we have a specific tab on molecular epidemiology, so it doesn't say WGS training, but again, because the training goes above and beyond just whole genome sequencing to next-gen sequencing, it is called molecular epidemiology. And this is where you can access links to the modules, to the webinars, to the Q&A page, and other resource documents. Let's start with the modules and webinars. They are all recorded, all available. These are 4 modules and 4 webinars with similar topics, but more in-depth coverage. One of our goals is not just to train or educate the audience, but also to train subject matter experts themselves. So we specifically chose speakers and presenters to represent different COEs, different expertise, and these speakers that work together to develop these modules and webinars are also available to present on whole genome sequencing, next-gen sequencing, molecular epidemiology at different conferences and meetings. So we continue to build our roster of presenters that can cover these topics for you at different locations and at different meetings. So these modules can be accessed under the module page there. The 4 modules that we have is, the first one is Genetics and Evolution 101. That basically provides a background on how does a viral genome different from a bacterial genome, from a parasite genome, how do they change, to provide the basic knowledge that is really needed to help with interpretation of whole genome sequence data. The next one is an introduction into next-gen sequencing methodologies. From there, we move into introduction to how to analyze sequence data. And then finally, we move into more in-depth sequence analysis, including how to build trees, how to visualize genetic relatedness, and broadly speaking, different ways of how these results from whole genome sequencing can and are communicated from a lab to an epidemiologist, and how the epidemiologist can use and help interpret these data sets or these reports they receive. These modules have been pretty well visited, more than 1,000 unique views, more than 1,500 page views, and these are available for you, and we hope you will share them with people that might benefit from those. And here's just how you access them, how you access the files, brief introduction of some more details of what these different modules cover to help you decide whether you want to start from one or whether you want to jump in at some later ones. So they don't necessarily have to be looked upon sequentially. If you have specific questions, you want to understand something more, you can jump into any of them that you feel provides you with the relevant information. In addition to these 4 general modules, we have started the process of developing pathogen-specific modules. And the first module actually is an introduction to HIV and HIV evolution, and how HIV trace uses genetic distances to define potential transmission clusters. So this is obviously relevant for people that either very specifically are interested in how molecular epidemiology is used to trace HIV transmission, but also more general to help people understand how these tools can be used as we try to trace viral disease outbreaks. The next module that we're working on is one on Listeria monocytogenes, and we will then continue to add pathogen-specific modules. Here's the topics of the webinars. Not going to read through them in detail. You can review those. You can see some parallel, but what we added here is really in the last module, case studies on how WGS has been used in foodborne disease surveillance and outbreak investigation, with individuals from multiple COEs and states and CDC contributing to these case studies. We have pathogen-specific webinar on HIV, and then the next pathogen-specific modules and webinars to be added to it, as I mentioned before. And again, these webinars have been viewed and quite considerably, and provide a very nice sort of hand-in-hand resource with these modules that I introduced you to. And once again, here's how you can access them. You can view the webinar, you can view the slide set, I'm pretty sure you can download the slide sets. If for some reason you want access to slide sets and make them your own and can't access them, feel free to let me know, and be happy to share those slides too, so you can utilize them. The webinars, even on the live sessions, were very well attended. Almost 900 attendees, basically all the states. So we provided some fairly good, what we hope is some fairly good baseline coverage on background with these modules on these webinars. But we realized that the classic sort of webinars, more or less one-way communication, will only get us partway there with regard to helping facilitate rapid and effective implementation of whole genome sequencing and next-gen sequencing tools in foodborne disease surveillance. So we, from there, moved into a series of more interactive live learning modules and operations to support this. These were run by different CoEs. The first test run of this was Operation GNome, which was organized by the New York CoE, which was 4 or 5 separate sessions where we had live participants that could choose to participate in one session, all 6 sessions, and then posted some of these on YouTube. What we learned very quickly is that while this was useful, we didn't have a consistent group of people that marched together through this. So this was not what I would call a real live learning group, because we didn't maintain the same group. And so that really helped us to then work with the Colorado CoE to then move into what I would call more true live learning sessions, which we have one going on right now and a number of additional ones planned for the next few months. Operation GNOME was very strongly case-based, so we have another number of case studies, and our goal was to really encourage different states to represent their different case studies, and then use some case studies from some of our experience here at Cornell in terms of use of whole genome sequencing. The live learning training that we're doing now, we will have 4 new series in 2018. The Minnesota series already has been completed. For the Tennessee series, we've had the first session completed, and Florida and Oregon series that are organized by those CoEs are still in the future. The Florida series is scheduled to start May 2. The idea here is to limit participation to 15 to 25 participants per series. And this is sort of a very practical reason, because in the platform we're using, which is called Zoom, you can see up to 20 people on one screen. So it allows you to feel some sort of interactivity and really build a group that works together to learn from each other. And the hope is that we build up these groups that then will continue to support each other as we implement whole genome sequencing across the different states and health departments represented by these participants. And so you can see sort of a typical screenshot of participants on the right side. What we learned, including through the original series in New York, that it is very important for all participants to have cameras so people do feel like they connect to each other and build that critical mass of people that can work together and will work together. The CoE Live, we're going to report a little bit on the live learning sessions that we completed. So the first one was organized by fall and last year by Colorado. We had 17 participants, 5 sessions with some guest speakers. The one in Minnesota that we completed had over 20 attendees from 8 states, including laboratory staff from some of the states, and was 4 sessions. Because Minnesota is one of the states which has already considerable expertise with whole genome sequencing, they ran it predominantly with their own speakers. The Tennessee session, which is going on right now, much more closely mimics the Colorado section and really is taking a number of these materials and further refining them and using them. This is what the Colorado sessions had at the 5 specific sessions on the live learning session. So first one was a comparison of whole genome sequencing and PFGE, how to use them together. Second was a second outbreak scenario focusing on specifically whole genome sequencing. And then 4 really focused on some very practical parts on how do you prioritize resources, how do you transition into whole genome sequencing. Those states and those health departments who have done this, such as Minnesota and New York, had some, I think, very hands-on practical considerations to share and really helped other states then to also reflect and talk about their experience as they move through that transition, which isn't always as smooth as everyone would hope. And then in the final session, I sort of helped to discuss how whole genome sequencing may change our relationship with regulatory agencies, FDA, USDA, state ag and markets departments, as well as industry, drawing on some of our experiences working with industry and others as they also transition and increasingly use whole genome sequencing. So as part of this, I'm very happy to have Mary Lee from the Arizona State Health Department with us. She was one of the attendees in the Colorado session, and she'll talk to us a little bit about what she learned from it and how they continued to use this learnings to help them sort of as they transition into using whole genome sequencing. So we transition over to Mary Lee to talk a little bit about her experiences with these live learning sessions and then continued follow-up after the live learning session.
Hi, thanks, Martin. This is Mary Lee Kellis at the Arizona Department of Health Services. I was asked to just, like you said, talk a little bit about my experience with this live learning series. So before I participated in the series, I had reviewed the modules that Martin talked about. I also had participated in the webinars. I thought they provided excellent background, and in fact, I'm glad that they were introduced as kind of a mandatory prerequisite to participate in the live learning series so we could all get on the same page. Provided the basics of whole genome, the difference between high-quality SNP analysis and WG-MLST. I especially like the Harry Potter presentation that compared whole genome sequencing to Harry Potter series that Joel Savinsky did. That was fantastic. And then when participating in the live learning series, I was able to build on that. I mean, the webinars and the modules gave information, but really it was kind of like a stopping point for us. We didn't really know what to do next to really integrate whole genome sequencing into our surveillance and outbreak response. So the live learning series was really useful in giving like practical information about how do we do this specifically, procedures about who does what. It was very helpful to hear from other states, Minnesota in particular, that already had a well-established whole genome sequencing program, about how their whole genome surveillance compared to their existing PFGE surveillance, and we could talk amongst ourselves about how we wanted to implement that. It was also very helpful for me to understand that there was a difference in the sequencing piece of whole genome and the analysis piece, and to understand that those were performed separately, which I didn't understand that before, and then also understanding that while they may be performed by the same person, they really do require different skill sets, and in different states it might look different about who's doing the sequencing and who's doing the analysis and how we can get resources for that. And the live learning series provided us contacts with the Colorado lab that did provide us some support during outbreak response. We were able to talk with other EPIs about how they were implementing whole genome sequencing, other people kind of at the same level as us, and then also others who had a more established program. There was one session in particular that was very helpful that Martin led that asked really intense questions about what we're doing with whole genome sequencing, how we're doing it, how whole genome sequencing might not eliminate the need, and it definitely doesn't eliminate the need for analytical epi work, and really just challenged us to think critically about how we use or want to use whole genome sequencing. And I want to give 2 examples of how we've used whole genome sequencing since the live learning series that we participated in. First, there's a pattern of Salmonella puna 18 that caused a large outbreak of linked to cucumbers. Many of you participated in that, and we still have some PTSD over here about that. But this particular pattern has been flagging every now and then ever since. And we've done a lot of epi work to kind of see if there's anything in common between these cases, see if there's cucumbers, anything else. And we were able to use resources that we learned from the live learning series to get some whole genome sequencing support for one of these clusters, these post-cucumber outbreak clusters of puna, that confirmed that they were not related according to whole genome sequencing. And so that really confirmed what our epi data was showing, and it allowed us to move along and not feel like we needed to continue to spin our wheels to identify a common source. And then another example, we had an outbreak of salmonella linked to snakes, and in the process of the investigation, we collected some environmental samples that yielded salmonella isolates, and we were able to identify human isolates that matched those patterns, and then using whole genome sequencing that you can see on the screen, we were able to use support from the Colorado lab to get some analysis of the sequenced isolates that did show that the patients with various animal exposures were highly related to the environmental isolates that came from animals. So in summary, this was a very useful live learning series that I think really jump-started our ability to even begin to use whole genome sequencing on our own during single state or even regional outbreak investigations.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Marilee? Because I think we have some great, really tangible examples here. So for the puna isolates, I presume they matched by PFGE to the cucumber outbreak, right? And then whole genome sequence showed you that they actually weren't related to it.
Exactly.
Okay. Cool. Okay. There are no more questions. Maybe there will be some at the end. Thank you very much. That was a great sort of practical presentation and example. And I think that connection is really, to me, is one of the really important parts, is that we laterally connect practitioners, and it's not you have to work with CDC, which I'm, don't want to say something that's not, but sometimes it might be faster and easier to get support for quick analytical questions laterally from other state health departments, particularly as we're starting to build some regional positions that are bioinformatics, which Colorado has one of them, and their job really will be to help support on a regional basis some of these bioinformatics needs, such as the ones you described. So this is a great example of how it's not just the series themselves, but then the connections built that really help with very practically utilizing these resources effectively to identify sources and exclude sources and exclude potential sources, such as shown with the cucumber example. Here's some more sort of general comments on follow-up after the Colorado live learning series. So some of the most valuable course components. And again, I think those connections regionally, sometimes my experience is the training from CDC is often, under ideal scenarios what will happen, but I think when we really talk about implementation at the state health departments, there's some challenges that CDC may not always experience and sort of understand at the same level as only connect state health departments, which is one of the key roles, as I at least see it, of the COEs. And then some examples of how people applied this learnings in these live learning sessions. to their own job going forward after the live learning session. And we also do evaluations on those, and here's some sort of overall summaries on these, and then we're using those evaluations also to further refine and change these sessions to continue to build them as we offer them with the different COEs, and even as we move into plans for the next fiscal year, so for 2018-19. And there we're also looking really for your input, what you feel, so those of you on this webinar today, is needed or could be helpful in the future. This is what the Minnesota whole genome sequencing live learning series looked like. So you can see very similar, 2 scenarios, examples of some real-world outbreaks, and then again the focus on resource prioritization, practical considerations. How do you set up a system where you can really manage this with resources you have, where you're going to run into bottlenecks, and what you need to consider as you implement whole genome sequencing. And then the current session was Tennessee. As I said, first session was yesterday, 20 participants, 5 sessions, same guest speakers as we had in the Colorado session, and 2 more coming up. So if you feel like you're not in the required mailing list, which you probably are because you've invited to this webinar, but keep your ears to the ground for the 2 sessions that are still coming. If you want to participate, or if you have people that you know or in your state who think might benefit from participation in these series. So here's how the Tennessee session is organized. And again, you see a very similar patterns to what we showed you before. So to support these sessions, we also are actively working on building the molecular epidemiology Q&A page. We have 29 answered questions. This is an opportunity for you to also submit your questions. If you have questions that you wanted to ask but you didn't find the correct venue, if you have questions you asked but you didn't feel like the answers were comprehensive enough, or you have questions that you feel like others would benefit from it, please provide them to us. We are happy to then direct them to CDC colleagues at different state health departments to answer them. We are actively working with CDC to get their answers to some of those questions. As we're answering more questions, we really need to reorganize and redesign this web page, which is what we're doing on right now, to have topic areas. So this one is a developing page because obviously there's a lot of new questions and new answers coming up as we go through this. So this is another resource to utilize, and where we could use your help to continue to build this resource. Here's some examples of questions, for example, cost per genome analyzed, etc. And we've got some slides, got some information that covers that. Here's some question that we just sort of added in terms of turnaround time, and where to get further answers to these types of questions. And here's some examples of some of the answers that we got from CDC that really go much more sometimes in the nitty-gritty of, how can, when, where, and how can State Department of Health organize analyze their own data. How will that work with bionumerics? When will bionumerics have these capabilities? And how will it be updated? Obviously, some very, very important questions as you plan for your infrastructure and your talent pool and the people you need to hire to work on this transition to effectively implement whole genome sequencing. So expect more of these, and once again, a plea for you to also give us your questions that we might be able to answer here. We're working on pathogen-specific webinars. There are, as some of you probably realize, a lot of changes, particularly in the specific approaches used, as the databases for Salmonella are being developed and the typing schemes are being rolled out. So we're trying to wait until we have at least sort of a core technical content that isn't going to change too quickly before we put these webinars up. Listeria monocytogenes obviously is there, but stay tuned for other ones on Salmonella and other organisms. And these ones hopefully will come out and will be released, these modules, and then webinars will be released in 2018. Another big and growing effort is really what we would call one-on-one support. That's both on the epi side, but also on the bioinformatics side and the lab side, and just general support as people are trying to set up the infrastructure, hire people, and apply and use whole genome sequencing tools. Colorado CoE is very strong in providing public health bioinformatics support, as you heard from Mary Lee, because they have one of these regional bioinformatics support people. Colorado CoE also supported, for example, Kansas on identifying specific CoE resources for training new employees and interns on basic epidemiology. So very often, the questions requests might come in, not necessarily as whole genome sequencing requests, and we also help point out other related resources that the CoEs provided. Or sometimes the questions might come in not as a whole genome sequencing question, but evolve into providing support on whole genome sequencing. Minnesota CoE worked with Illinois for the transition of Listeria monocytogenes from PFG to whole genome sequencing. Helped Rhode Island to really come up with an outbreak investigation scenario to improve epi-lab communications, talk through them in terms of how to communicate whole genome sequence data. Trees can get overwhelming and difficult to interpret. What other options are there to communicate this data? New York also has strong bioinformatics and whole genome sequencing group. We support New Jersey on the Listeria monocytogenes whole genome sequencing implementation. We even provide help with regard to training, to job announcements and job skills needed for a bioinformatics person that could work, in this case, at an agriculture department that is implementing whole genome sequencing. And we have gone as far as training people hands-on in our labs in Cornell. We hosted someone who will work with the Tennessee CoE and the Tennessee Department of Health, and they spent time in our lab for 2 weeks to be trained practically hands-on on whole genome sequencing. So there's really a whole range from the half an hour to an hour call to really deploying people and inserting people into an existing group that does whole genome sequences, that does data analysis to help train people on that. And this is an area, I think, with considerable continued growth and continued efforts to bring that to you. And again, it's an area where we're looking for your ideas, your needs. Some of these one-on-one activities that help us also develop larger resources. If we get similar one-on-one requests multiple times, it will help us identify those needs. So it's a very important piece of this overall puzzle. And the important thing is that the CoEs are paid, the CoEs are funded to help you. This is not, you're not asking us for a favor. This is our job, and if you ask us to help you, that really is good for us and hopefully good for you. So I strongly want to encourage all of you to come to us, reach out, and let other people know that we are a resource to help with this. Plan future efforts. One thing that we have not done yet but has come up is, as a next step, is how do we train, what are the needs for training communications with the environmental health part? More and more environmental health investigations, samples are collected, these are used for whole genome sequencing as part of root cause analysis, traceback, confirming outbreak sources. We are starting some efforts to explore the specific needs there with CDCs and others. That is something we're exploring as a future effort. Another thing we have seen is the need for help and support with communications between lab and epi particularly, but also lab, epi, environmental health. One of the ideas we are discussing right now as we plan for 2018-19, does it make sense to develop a next set of live learning series where we're trying to bring epi and lab together? So far, by and large, our live learning sessions have focused on epidemiologists, but this could be one where we try to specifically recruit an epidemiology in the lab person from each state that has responsibility and works on foodborne disease outbreak investigation and whole genome sequencing. We also anticipate to coordinate our efforts with regional bioinformatics staff as more of them are available, become hired, and really integrate them because they provide a really important resource in this. And I think, at least in the short term, we kind of try to continue to expand our capabilities and capacities for one-on-one assistance and support with regard to whole genome sequencing. Here's the contact information if you want to email any of us in particular. Again, each of us should be a good entry point, and we will find you the right resources needed. And this is really what I had for today. At this point, I'm happy to open it up for questions, and equally as important maybe for suggestions, ideas for where your needs are, where we could contribute as we all continue to move forward on increased use and in transitioning of use of whole genome sequencing in foodborne disease surveillance. If you come up with ideas afterwards, feel free to email me or any others on this list at any time. With that, I want to open it up for questions. Thank you very much. If you want to ask a question, you have to unmute yourself. That means you either mouse over your name or mouse over at some point on your slide, and you should see a button or something that says unmute. And I think there also is a chat possibility so where you can type in questions too if you want to use that.
Yes, hi Martin, this is Tamara. I'll just say briefly while we are waiting to see if other folks can figure out the mute and unmute buttons and formulate their questions. I do want to remind everyone that this was the fourth in the series. We have a fifth webinar coming up. It is scheduled for May, and it will be presented by the Oregon Center of Excellence, and they will be presenting, it is scheduled currently for May 9th, but keep your eyes open for follow-up emails that will give more details about it. But it is going to be presented on C4 best practices and how some specific ways in which model practice occurs in Oregon in that fine state outbreak response setting. So if you stay tuned for more information on that upcoming and final webinar in our CoE webinar series. All right, open it up to questions.
Hi, this is Mackenzie in Arizona. I have a question about the NCBI pathogen portal. I don't know if this is the right place to ask, but it's really useful. We recently used it to look at a couple of cases that were matched by PFGE, but we were told, and I don't know exactly where it came from, that it's different in bionumerics, so it may be analyzed differently. Do you know anything about this?
Okay, so I have Renato here with Roy, so we're going to try to, we might need help from some other people on this call, but we'll try to do our best, and then if we don't get you a good answer, we'll find out. But I think some of these use of multiple resources is also a good one to add to some of our frequently asked questions. I think yours is one that we could probably directly transcribe into that. But with that, I'll turn it over to Renato to see whether he can provide some answers here.
Hi, Mackenzie. This is Renato. So the NCBI pathogen detection page, they use a different pipeline to call their SNPs. I've tried to ask them about their pipeline. The only answer I got was that it was very complex, and they're going to be publishing something shortly about that. But I don't know specifically what kind of pipeline they use. But I know it's different from bionumerics. That's why the results might be different.
Are the same isolates in both of them? Do you know? Bionumerics versus that pipeline?
Yeah.
So the problem is with a lot of these systems that while you get similar answers, depending on the actual methodology used to call SNPs and score them, you might get slightly different answers. So we're going to dig into that a little bit more and translate it into a sort of a frequently asked question, and also make sure we get it back to you. If there anyone else is on here that wants to jump in and has more details, please do so. All right,
okay.
We'll dig into this a little bit more.
Yeah, that sounds great. We're just trying to determine how reliable it would be because it's a really quick way to get some information about SNP differences. So anything you have would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
Well, this is Renato again. I just want to say what I usually do is I look at the pathogen detection page, and if something looks similar, I try to download the original data, and then I run the analysis using one of the pipelines, either the LiveSet pipeline from CDC or the CFSEN pipeline from FDA. And usually the results are very consistent, but sometimes I do get like some differences, some relevant differences.
Okay, other questions or comments? Okay, doesn't seem like we have anyone in the chat either. So if there are none, as said, contact us by email. Questions like the one we just got from Mackenzie are really great, and we will, again, utilize those because I think it really brings up the whole challenge about all the various different sort of resources available, how to compare them, how to use them, how to decide when to use which one, which I think is a good sort of topic to include in some of these things.
This is Tamara again. I do want to chime in and just reiterate what Martin said earlier, that the COEs are here to assist. So if you have other questions that come up, please do not hesitate to contact your regional COE or any of us, whoever you happen to have contact information for. But if you have any questions at all, suggestions, ideas for training, we are happy to hear it. That is what we are funded to do, and we love to hear from you. So if there are no more questions, oh, go ahead.
No, that was just me.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, if there are no more questions, though, then I think we can probably end for today. Thank you to Dr. Wiedemann for all of his assistance, for the information. Thank you to everyone attending. And if you have, again, questions or suggestions for future webinars, please do not hesitate to let us know. Thank you.